Hello Year 9 and welcome to our third lesson in our series looking at component 1. I hope that you've had a good week. I hope you've had the opportunity to have a look at the key questions, because we're going to go through those as with last week. We're going to go through those first. So if you want to just pause and just look in your facts book and recap those questions before we go through them, please do so now. You'll notice that this week is really a continuation of last week's lesson, because we're going to be looking at physical development again, and we're going to be looking at physical development for both. So you can see that we're looking at physical. Look, so of the pies, it's physical we're focusing on. We are going to look at some aspects of infancy as last week, and then we're also going to go on to the next life stage of early childhood. If you had the opportunity this week of completing jotting down your information about your own milestones, so for example when you were first able to crawl or sit up or start walking and so on, it would probably be useful to have that with you as well. So if you need to pause this just to go through the questions and to collect any information, please do. Okay, so just to recap the questions from last week, there were 5 key questions last week. Some of these are ones that you really do need to know off by heart, a bit like the ones in week 1. So in week 1, the ones that you need to know, really do need to know off by heart, are what pies stand for. So just check that to yourself. And also what the life stages are and what their ages are. Similarly, for question 1, we do need to know what gross motor development and fine motor development mean. And gross motor development is the big muscles, so for example arms and legs. Fine motor development is the small muscle development, so hands, fingers, toes. Question 2, top to toe development means top to bottom, so from the top of your head down to your feet. Question 3, inner to outer means the inner part of our body, so our torso or our body out. So we gain control, or babies gain control of their neck, for example, and their back muscles earlier than their arms, hands, feet, and like legs and feet. Number 4, what does same pattern, different rates mean? That means that everyone follows the same pattern unless there are particular illnesses, for example, or preconditions, but at different times. So some will meet a milestone, and a milestone is an event so that you would expect to happen. So for example, sitting up, crawling, walking and so on, but we all do that at different times. And the last one, can you name 5 physical changes in infancy? So you should have remembered things like rapid physical growth. You may have got in this, for physical development, being able to roll over, being able to crawl, being able to walk, to sit up, to run, to hold a spoon and so on. Okay, well done with that. If there's anything you need to go through or to double check, or if there's any of those you're not quite sure about, please stop and go through it. You can rewind, you can recap before you move on. Okay, so today, as you can see, we are on week 3 and we are going to be looking at physical development in infancy and early childhood. Again, as I said to you last week, just pause this for a moment and go through the key questions, because we are going to be going through the answers to these key questions during this PowerPoint. And so it would be useful to just make sure that you're familiar with them before you move on. Okay, so at birth, when a baby is born, they are born with what's called primitive reflexes. Primitive reflexes, this means things that are automatic. The primitive part of our brain is our center part of the brain, the bit right in the middle. And primitive reflexes are the things that our body does that we don't consciously control. So for example, the kind of things that a baby is able to do are, when they're born, they have a sucking reflex, which enables them to feed. They have a rooting reflex, which means that they automatically search for food. They also have a grasping reflex, which means that if a hand is placed in front of them, they will hold on to a finger. They are also born with a stepping reflex, and what this means is if a baby is held with their feet touching a surface, they will make stepping movements. That doesn't mean that they can walk, of course, but the body automatically does stepping movements. They also have a startle reflex. If there's a loud or sudden movement, they will startle. They will throw their arms back, and they'll often freeze as well. Other primitive reflexes are things like blinking, for example, that we can't consciously control, or breathing. Okay, so the primitive reflexes are the central things that our body needs to survive. Okay, and a baby is born with all of those primitive reflexes already in place. The core part of the brain is there. Now, the brain does a lot of development and growing once a baby's born, but those things are already in place because they have to be for a baby to survive. Okay, now you might want to just pause this as we're going through this, because there's quite a lot of information here. And I know I've said to you before that if you've got a couple of sheets of paper or a folder that you can jot things down in, that would be really handy. So you might want to jot a few of these down, just some key things, some key examples. This answers questions 1 and 2 and 3 in your facts book for this week. Okay, so physical development in infancy and early childhood. Remember, we know that infancy goes from 0 to 2, and then early childhood is 3 to 8. Okay, now this has been divided into gross motor skills, the big muscles, and fine motor skills, the small muscles. And you can see that although gross motor skills are developed first, fine motor skills follow very quickly afterwards. So there is a little bit of overlap. So from birth to 6 months, a baby is able to lift its head and chest by the age of about 3 months, and will be able to roll over between 5 and 6 months. It would be really useful here if you've been able to jot down when you hit your own milestones. You could maybe have that sheet of paper alongside while you're looking at this, and you could just do a bit of a comparison and just see where you fit on here, because remember that everyone hits their milestones but at different times. Fine motor skills, at 3 months a baby can hold a rattle, and by 5 to 6 months they will reach out to get a toy. So you can see then that the hand and the fingers are obviously developing. Between 6 months and 12 months is a time of very rapid development. A baby can sit without help by about 8 months. Sometimes that varies. Usually they can walk holding furniture at about a year old. Again, that can vary. You can compare to yours. Some babies can do that a little bit earlier. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Generally speaking, most infants can walk by 18 months. That's generally the and you can see that here. Look, 12 to 18 months, walks around 12 months, but definitely by 18 months, unless of course there are any pre-existing conditions, and will start to climb the stairs by 18 months. If we stay on gross motor skills, by 2 years old can kick and throw a large ball, can propel a wheeled toy, so basically can start to play with toys and to start to control them. And between 2 to 3 years, so we're going into early childhood now. At 2 years start to walk upstairs. At 2.5 years jump from a small step. And I could have added on here other things such as by this time started to ride a tricycle, for example, being able to coordinate to kick a football and so on. And so you can see how this develops as they go into early childhood. If we go on to the fine motor skills that are developing all the time, by 6 months old, an infant can grasp and pass an object from hand to hand and can start to use their fingers and thumbs to grasp something by 9 months old. At 12 months can start to pick up small objects and hold a crayon. So you can see that this is developing very rapidly. By 18 months can feed themselves with a spoon and build a tower with blocks. And as they go into early childhood, can start to draw lines and circles in a book and turn pages of a book. So you can see then that by the time they go into early childhood, they are developing their skills very readily. Now, this is questions 1, 2 and 3 in your facts book. Now, you'll notice question 3, the question is, when do most infants begin walking? And the answer there is 13 months, because that's an average. You'll notice that's a little bit different to the one here, because different texts have different textbooks have different ages, but the average, if you combine a group of infants together, the average is 13 months. Some will be earlier than that, some will be later than that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this word, milestones. Milestones are developed by observing a large number of children, and what they will look at is the stage of development most have reached by a particular time. So if we take walking that I've just mentioned, what the observers will look at is a group of children. They will look at the information about when those children started walking, and they will look at an average. But remember that some will not reach the milestones at that time and others will reach them earlier. Okay, so milestones is what all children will reach unless they have pre-existing conditions, but they will not all reach them at the same time. So in summary, just to sum up infancy before we move on to early childhood. Infancy is a time of rapid physical development. Infants are born with primitive reflexes. If you need to go back and check what they are, please do. There is fast physical growth at this time, and infants will hit their milestones at different times. Infants are all the time learning gross and fine motor skills during this life stage. If you need to pause this just to double check, if you need to go back and check anything, please do. So, as we go into early childhood, the physical development continues, but it's slightly less rapid. So in early childhood, the rate of physical development does slow down a little bit. However, physical development is still happening. There is a growth spurt between the ages of 5 and 7, but in fact, throughout early childhood, so between the ages of 3 and 8, there is significant physical growth. A child's head continues to be larger than an infant's, but is smaller in proportion to its body, so it's starting to look more proportional to the body. Fine motor skills are developed much further, so things like coordination and balance improves. So in early childhood, for example, a child will learn to ride a bike. They can balance on a sort of balance beam. They are able to do games such as skipping, for example, which require coordination. And during this life stage, it's very important that a child is active. The recommended level of activity in this life stage is an hour a day. So between the ages of 3 and 8, so there are some key milestones. So by the age of 5, children will have developed the skills needed for everyday activities. This is question 4 in your questions for this week. Okay, the question is, by which age do most children have developed gross and fine motor skills? And the answer is by the age of 5 years. By this time, children have developed their fine and gross motor skills to such an extent that they can do a lot of things for themselves. So for example, dress themselves, put their shoes on, wash their face, use a knife and fork, brush their teeth, and so on. They become a lot more independent by this time. This one is question 5. Question 5 is, by what age do children have good control, coordination and balance? The answer is by the age of 8. So by the time a child is 8, they will have good coordination, so they can do a different range of physical activities. They have good control and balance, and this helps them in physical games and sports. Also at this time, muscles and bones are much stronger. They become much stronger in this life stage as muscle tissue increases. This is why it's really important in this life stage to have adequate nutrition. And in this life stage, it's really important to have a good amount of protein in the diet, because protein is really important for developing muscles. In this life stage, teeth start to fall out. The baby teeth fall out and permanent teeth grow, which is why in this life stage it continues to be really important to have calcium, a good amount of calcium in the diet. And the child will become much taller and stronger in this life stage. Stamina improves, so they can do physical activity for a longer period of time. So the key milestones then in early childhood. Now you might want to pause this here. We're going to have a look at these, but you might want to pause these and just practice looking at gross and fine motor skills. So have a look at which of these are gross motor skills, which of these are fine motor skills, and which of these are both. Okay? Okay, so well done for having a look at that. So let's have a look at gross motor skills. So gross motor skills, we'll use the yellow for this. So can walk backwards and sideways from 3 years old is gross motor skills. Catching a ball with 2 hands and bouncing a ball. Okay, which one is that? Do you think that's gross or fine motor skills? Yep, you're right. That, because it's using your hands and your fingers to catch them, that is fine motor skills. While we've got the green here, let's have a look at some other fine motor skills. So hold your crayon and copying letter shapes is a fine motor skill. Using joined up writing is a fine motor skill. Using a needle, that's actually a very developed fine motor skill, as is beginning to thread small beads. And building a small tower is a fine motor skill. So you can see there's lots and lots of fine motor skills. We'll have a look at why in a moment. Now, I'm going to change this colour a little bit to blue, because I know we've talked about riding a tricycle before and a bicycle. As we know, this is both. We're using our big muscles and we're also using our small muscles, so this is both. This one is both as well, because running on their toes, okay, so being able to go on tiptoes is using your fine muscles. That's actually a fine motor skill. Walking on a line and using that coordination is a gross motor skill. Okay, so that's a bit of both. Now you'll notice on here that we've got much more fine motor skills, and that's because they are much more complex than gross motor skills, and that's why they are developed in early childhood, because the brain is developing and becoming much more complex in early childhood. And obviously in early childhood as well, physically a child is getting stronger as well, so the muscles are much stronger at this point. So the muscles in the hand and the fingers become more able to do these activities. Right, so this week, as in previous weeks, please go through the key questions. What I would suggest this week is go through the ones for this week and make sure that you're happy with them, make sure you know them, but also go through the ones for last week and the week before as well. Make sure you're happy with them, make sure that you know them, and if there's any that you are uncertain about, then obviously recap it. If there's anything, and I know I've said this every week, but if there's anything you're uncertain about, anything you're unclear about, anything you want to check, then please email me, okay, algarity@johnfernley.org. If you can, please have a look at the extension activities. And there are 2 extension activities this week. Okay, so the first extension activity is linked to one from last week. And if you got the opportunity last week to jot down some of the physical changes in infancy, you can add to that with this. If you completed it as notes, that's fine. And if you completed it as a timeline activity, you can add to the timeline. So last week, I asked you to look at some physical changes, your own physical changes from between 0 and 2. So things like when you were first able to sit up, to crawl, to walk, and so on. This week, I want you to extend that to look at the physical changes in early childhood. So for example, when were you first able to ride a bicycle? When did you hold a pencil or pen? When did you start to play football or any other sport? Did you play a musical instrument as a child? What other things, physical things happened? So for example, when did you start to learn to run, for example? So there's lots and lots of things that you could add to this. If you didn't get a chance last week to do your timeline, then you can do all of it this week. So you could do the infancy and early childhood together. Okay, it's just useful to add to your overall understanding. Now, I know I mentioned last week the episode, an extension activity, looking at the episode of A Secret Life of 4 and 5-year-olds, which is on 4 on demand. I know you've got this information in your fact book as well. If you did not have the opportunity of looking at this last week, please, and you have the chance this week, please have a look, even if you just watched part of it. If you did get the chance last week, then start to have a think about what gross and fine motor skills are they able to do at the start of the episode. So what kind of things can they do? For example, building blocks and so on. What are they able to do at the end of the episode? So how has their physical development altered and changed by the end? So what are they able to do at the end that they weren't able to do at the start? Okay. Please this week have a look at the key questions. If you can have a look at the extension activities, that's wonderful. If you have any queries, questions, or anything you're uncertain about, please get in touch. And have a good week, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.